I'm Bill Kassel, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We reflect on one of the most important church leaders of our time, and we explore the elusive realm of spiritual warfare. Join us, sit back and enjoy some free expression. It seems you can't get through a week without hearing of some horrible crime, terrorist attack, even a domestic situation so shockingly extreme that ordinary human motives are inadequate to explain it. When we confront that level of evil, we have to suspect there are forces at work that transcend our day-to-day experience, and indeed there may very well be. More and more, attention is turning to conflict in the spiritual realm. But how can we poor earthbound humans get our heads around the idea of cosmic powers battling it out, and in the process affecting our lives, our health, and our psychological well-being? How can we discern evil influences? Is there anything we can do to shield our souls and the souls of those we love? Dan Schneider and Jesse Romero address such questions in a new book from TAN Publishers, Spiritual Warfare Q&A for Priests and Laity. Dan teaches theology at Franciscan University of Steubenville. He's been with us before, and he's here now to tell us about this new work. Dan, good to speak with you again.
Bill, good to hear from you again. Thanks for having me on.
Now, you've taken a kind of a practical approach to phenomena that don't seem very practical at all. This is a kind of tactical handbook, if you will, for a war which we can't always be even certain we're fighting. Tell us how this whole thing works, would you?
Jesse and I have been talking for several years about putting something together. We get so many questions, hundreds of questions in our various platforms each week from people that listen to our podcast and know of our work, and they're just seeking help, seeking answers. And so we started just assembling them, then cleaned them up and put them into a book format. And, I do, with my work with Father Ripperger and La Liber Christo, I do training and consultation for priests as well, and exorcist and training of priests in this particular business. And so questions that come in from priests as well. So we put a couple chapters in there from those questions that came in from priests on how priests can live out their sacerdotal dignity and engage in spiritual combat.
Yeah, what are some of the issues you address in here?
We kind of start broadly speaking. We kind of go over some questions about exorcism basics. What is exorcism for deliverance? Is it as simple as invoking the name of Jesus, and can we just call on the name of Jesus and drive demons out? Who can do this? What is the difference between power and authority? What are some of the sins, common sins that we see in cases of possession? And everything like, what do you think about horror movies? Why do demons hate Gregorian chant and Latin? Chucky dolls, if you've ever seen a Chucky doll. And so some of the things are questions like that, and other ones are going to be more specific. Why is the rosary a very effective weapon against the devil? How do I get rid of cursed objects? If I find cursed objects in my home, what's the formula for that? Generational spirits, what does the church teach about that? That comes up a lot when I'm traveling in various conferences, and that how do we use sacramentals? So those are some of the lay people questions that we go deeper into, and then questions on priests that come in. Who can pray chapter 3, the minor exorcism? Is that a restricted prayer? What is the imposition of hands? What's the significance of that? What can priests pray? How can priests pray these certain deliverance prayers or binding prayers and help their the life of their parish? How can they engage in spiritual combat? Because most priests, quite frankly, they're not getting any of this in seminaries today, so they're having to learn this on their own. And there's good theology and there's bad theology out there, so we just try to put out some good theology, if we could, some DDT, as Jesse calls it, devil-defeating theology. theology based on the ancient tradition and teachings of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, the church has been addressing this for centuries upon centuries now. They've built up a whole arsenal of spiritual weapons. How did this whole thing develop? How did the church arrive at these various formulae?
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I did the developmental editing for the official biography put out by 10 books on the life of Father Gabriel Amorth. After the Second Vatican Council, there was a real movement, rather rationalist movement in seminaries as well as in many Catholic universities to kind of dismiss any talk of spiritual combat, spiritual warfare, even the devil himself. This is archaic, this is preconciliar, this is just medieval piety coming in. The devil really only, there is no such thing as a personified devil. He is just the personification of the evil that exists in each of our hearts, that sort of thing. And so that was kind of the predominant movement until Father Gabriel Amorth came along and was asked by the Vicar General of the Diocese of Rome if he would be willing to become an exorcist and study under Father Candido Amantini. This would have been in the late 70s, early 80s. And Father Amorth was, he wrote several books, An Exorcist Tells a Story, more stories. At that time, I think I recall from that book, I think there were, in the 80s, we had 12 exorcists in the United States and something like 20 or 30 in Italy. Western culture just kind of dismissed it as this is vestiges of the past. We don't believe this anymore. And so so Protestantism, charismatic Pentecostal Protestantism, kind of was the only one out there doing any kind of spiritual combat. Right. Some of that gets filtered over into Catholicism through the charismatic renewal, and some of it was good, and some of it was more Protestant, kind of uncritically accepted Protestant theology. And so the church kind of has come up with a corrective measure, if you will. And since that time, there's been a much more of a understanding. The bishops here in this country, about 10 years ago when I first got started, maybe 15 years ago, they started the Pope Leo Institute, held every year at Mundelein in Chicago. Early on, I gave a couple lectures there and worked with the lay track years ago. Each diocese is supposed to have an exorcist, and so many bishops now recognize it because the people are knocking on the door at the diocese saying, "I need help, I need an exorcist." And so, and the churches, again, no one ever accused the church of moving quickly. The church is finally catching up, and there's now an institutional response, and our work kind of fits in theologically and practically, case management, hands-on. That's kind of the work that we're doing, try to fill that void, fill a gap, and provide a resource for priests and lay team members that are working in support of a local exorcist and parish priest.
We all face a variety of spiritual challenges. We run into people who are nasty. We see terrible, evil things unfold before us. Do you have any tips on how to discern when something really is so inexplicable, so evil that it's really entered the spiritual realm?
I think if you look at what happened in Minneapolis, and may God have mercy on their souls and be the comfort of those who are still suffering. Right. But yeah, when you see the phrase that we use is the demon militates to absurdity, and we're seeing this culturally. I think it was Sister Lucia of Fatima said that this society is undergoing diabolic disorientation. Some of these extreme things, the demon militates to absurdity. Ideally, we see these absurd things and wake up to it and realize we need to go back to God as a culture, as a people, as a family, as a church, return back to the roots and basis of foundations of the faith, of the ancient faith. We fight an ancient enemy and the ancient weapons are best, so returning back to tradition. This is really what the institutional response that's rising and happening and also needs to continue to happen.
If someone should encounter a situation that does seem to reflect spiritual warfare or evil beyond human explanation, what should they do? Is there a procedure within the average diocese, somebody to call?
Yes and no. I mean, we get questions from people from all over the world, and my first response is always, go see your local pastor. And so the local pastor should have experience on this. And, how many you ask your parish priest, and someone will say, "Well, I've got my house is haunted, and then I moved to this house, and then it was haunted. Then I moved in with my sister, and it had problems, and then I moved in with my baby daddy, and it had problems." And it's not the house; it's the person, oftentimes. And so, yeah, there are cases of infestation of place, but we have to exhaust the pastoral response before we just jump to minor exorcism or major exorcism. What is the pastoral response? Are you in a state of grace? Are you married in the church? Are you practicing? Do you have a life of virtue? When's the last time you went to confession? Do you go to Mass regularly? Do you have psychological issues? Do you need to work with a mental health professional to get your interior life under control? Do you have a spiritual director? Getting that initial pastoral response. A generation ago, the word pastoral vis-a-vis the Catholic priest meant the administration of the sacraments. And today, pastoral, it's been completely redefined as whatever the priest thinks won't offend the feelings of or that will best be for that person. But we have to exhaust the pastoral response first, and that is the sacramental response, the life of prayer, the life of grace. What are the ordinary means of obtaining grace? Father Morris talked about that. He said there's always a temptation, he says, for exorcists, charismatics, and sensitives that work with exorcists to circumvent or go outside of the ordinary means of obtaining grace, and in so doing, unwittingly can fall into a trap of superstition or magic. We can fall into kind of a white magic when we want to use the teachings or the resources of the church out of their proper order and not begin with the base ordinary means of attaining grace, the sacraments, prayer, penance, fasting, going back to those ancient weapons before we just automatically jump and just say, okay, there's a devil here, let's just fix it.
The book is Spiritual Warfare Q&A for Priests and Laity by Dan Schneider and Jesse Romero. Where can people find out more about it and get their hands on it?
You can go to the publisher, Tan Books. You can buy directly from them. It's also various Catholic booksellers, Amazon. You can get it at Amazon as well. I always encourage people to go to the publisher because it supports Catholic publishing. But it's out there in prevalence, and any booksellers now have it.
Dan Schneider of Franciscan University of Steubenville, thanks very much for speaking with us again.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me on, sir. The Australian Cardinal George Pell was one of the towering figures of Catholicism in recent decades. We've discussed before how he became ensnared in the priestly sex abuse scandal, was falsely convicted, went to prison, and then provided a stunning witness to Christian courage and forgiveness. Now, Ignatius Press has released a new collection of 32 reminiscences of this great churchman by an extraordinary group of his friends, colleagues, and admirers around the world. It's titled Remembering George Cardinal Pell, Recollections of a Great Man of the Church. One of those who share his memories in the book is Notre Dame professor Father Bill Miscamble. Father, thanks very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Bill, and to have the opportunity to speak about Cardinal Pell.
Cardinal Pell is so well known, but just to set the book in proper perspective, perhaps you could give us a little thumbnail of this Australian prelate and what made him so important.
Okay, I'll give you a sort of few biographical details. Of course, he was born in a Victorian provincial city, Ballarat, and grew up there. He was an excellent student and, by the way, also an excellent athlete. He played Australian rules football, and that's a rugged game, and perhaps that gave a certain shape to his personality. He was a man of strength, but he decided against a professional football career and entered the seminary, was ordained. He studied in Rome, was ordained there back in 1966, I think, if I remember correctly. And then he went on for advanced studies. He went to Oxford. He has a PhD in church history from there, so highly educated. Came back, was working in Ballarat, and was quickly made an auxiliary bishop in Melbourne, then became Archbishop of Melbourne. And for your listeners, you would know that Australia has two great cities, Sydney and Melbourne. Right. And Cardinal Pell was Archbishop first of Melbourne and then moved to Sydney and was Archbishop there. he was very much shaped, I think, in the era of St. John Paul II's papacy. John Paul made him a cardinal, I think, in 2003. He was a major figure in Australian religious but also social, cultural life, had a great devotion to Catholic education, great concern for youth. Some of your listeners may recall that the World Youth Day was held in Sydney in 2008. By that point, Pope Benedict was Pope and came out to Sydney. But then in 2014, Pope Francis appointed Cardinal Pell as the prefect to head this newly created Secretariat for the Economy. And that took him away from Australia and took him to Rome, where he did his best, Bill, to clean up, dare I say, Vatican finances. He wanted to have a proper auditing of finances and to get things on a more sort of regularized basis for handling funds. But then, as you alluded to in your introduction, troubles came for him. In 2017, he took a leave from his position in Rome to return to Australia. These absurd charges had been made against him. He underwent a first trial. There was a hung jury. Second trial actually convicted him, just a disgraceful decision. And Cardinal Pell was sent to prison. He was 400 days, slightly over 400 days in solitary confinement. Fortunately, eventually, the High Court of Australia overturned the rulings of these earlier courts, and he was freed and returned to Rome. I think it's fair to say that he was a strong proponent of the sort of John Paul II Benedict view of the church. He wanted the church to stand strong. He was not a person who wanted to, dare I say, kneel before the world. He just didn't want to accommodate all the sort of secular progressive trends. He wanted to evangelize. He wanted to evangelize the world. And he's a remarkable church figure. Anyway, perhaps I've gone on a little too long, Bill, but that's just sort of a quick overview of his great contributions in the church.
Yeah, that's fine. It has been suggested that perhaps his poking into the finances of the Vatican was one of the factors in his prosecution, that maybe the deck was stacked against him?
Yes. Now, there certainly has been considerable speculation about that. Nothing fully proven. I wish that some of these investigative journalists would do more probing of this matter in Australia. It's certainly the case that he had developed some opposition in Rome. The name that's often mentioned, of course, is Cardinal Bessieux. Cardinal Pell was trying to clean up some of those episodes, the London real estate deal and things of that sort. And the suggestion is made that there was a sort of a stirring up of activity in Australia to get Pell out of the way, to force him to go back to Australia to defend his reputation, etc. And that is a matter that perhaps the truth will come out fully at some time. You would recall, Bill, the level of the evidence against him was just so pathetic, these false charges. And it's been suggested that perhaps there was a fix-in with the Victorian police. So I leave that for your listeners to read up more about it. It's certainly an area where I think there are some questions that remain unanswered.
Well, as to the book, who are some of the folks reflecting on Cardinal Pell's life?
Yes. Well, let me just mention the book is edited and compiled by Dr. Tracy Rowland, a wonderful Australian theologian. She's an expert in the thought of Pope Benedict, of Cardinal Ratzinger's thought, etc., etc. But Tracy was at Cardinal Pell's funeral at St. Mary's Basilica in Sydney, and the idea of gathering some recollections of friends of Pell and so forth, I think, occurred to her there. She was discussing the situation with some friends. So she set about to get a group of folks who would make relatively brief contributions. They're not supposed to be hagiography. We're supposed to talk about our real engagements with Cardinal Pell and our interactions with him. And she assembled, I think, a terrific group. So there are high churchmen like Cardinal Dolan from New York, the former Cardinal Collins from Toronto. The Cardinal Dolan has a terrific piece in there. He's always very, very entertaining. And then there are figures from the Australian Church. Archbishop Anthony Fisher, who was Cardinal Pell's successor in Sydney, is there. Archbishop Julian Porteous of Hobart. But then there are public figures. Some of your listeners may not be familiar with some of the Australian public figures, but Tony Abbott was a former Prime Minister of Australia. He has a wonderful recollection. He was quite close to Pell. I think he saw Pell as a spiritual and a personal advisor. There are media figures, both from Australia and from the United States, like George Weigel has a lovely piece in there. But Andrew Bolt is a non-believer, non-Christian, but he saw the unfairness of the charges against Pell and became a vigorous defender of him. He has a terrific piece in there. There are women writers like Dame Joanna Bogle from England and the various Australian contributors. Some priests, of which, of course, I'm honored to be one who gives my own recollection of my association with Cardinal Pell, and various lay men and women. Pell had a great concern he wanted a well-educated laity. This is why he was so involved with Australian Catholic University and with Notre Dame Australia, the two Catholic universities in Australia. He wanted to sort of push back against beige Catholicism, and I think he would be pleased himself, I'm speculating here, but I think he would be pleased with the people who have written about him and what they have written about him. So for your listeners, it's a book that you can pick up and read one or two of these essays. You don't have to start at page 1 and work your way all through to the end. I think it's really a wonderful volume that gives a terrific sense of Cardinal Pell's many strengths.
Well, you have the sound of Down Under in your voice. What was your connection with Cardinal Pell?
Yes, well, I'm an Australian by birth and ended up teaching. I've taught at Notre Dame for 35 years. I came here and I'm a Holy Cross priest, the order associated with Notre Dame. But, of course, I've always retained my connections with Australia. My elderly parents were there for many years. They died in the not-too-distant past. And I actually first met Cardinal Pell in Chicago. I was fortunate through my friend Don Briel to attend a luncheon where Cardinal Pell and Cardinal Francis George were the guests of honor. And it was great to see, I write of this in my essay, to see those two great figures in the church interacting with each other. They worked together on a number of projects. And so having met him there, when I would be home in Australia for a visit to see my parents and so forth, I always made a point of connecting with Cardinal Pell. And I was in Sydney, and so saw him a number of times. And in fact, my last visit with him was after his first trial. Before the second trial, we had lunch in Sydney. I write about that. And my regard for him just grew with each meeting. He had a good sense of some of the challenges that we face in Catholic higher education in the United States, and we would talk about those matters. And his strength, his resolution always came through. So I found him to be someone who gave me encouragement and support in my own endeavors as a priest. So that's how I really knew him only for the last 20 years. I knew him for about 20 years. And I'm deeply grateful that I was able to have some friendship with him. I wrote to him during his time in prison. and connected with him after his release. So that's something of my own association with him, Bill.
Well, where can people find out more about the book and perhaps get their hands on it?
The book is published by Ignatius Press, as I think you mentioned in your opening. So folks can go to the Ignatius Press website and order it directly from the publisher. But I can assure you, for those who want to take, dare I say, the sort of easier way out, it's available through Amazon, of course. It's a book that's, I think, one that you can sort of, take on if you're going on a plane trip or something like that, take with you and read a couple of the essays. And I think folks will find it very beneficial for them personally. Cardinal Pell had as his motto on his coat of arms, somewhat inspired, of course, by John Paul II, be not afraid, be not afraid. Those great words of the Lord that JP2 introduced his papacy with, and Pell's strength, his ability to forgive those who had accused him unfairly, they come through. And I think your listeners who pick up the book will find it spiritually beneficial for them as well.
Remembering George Cardinal Pell, Recollections of a Great Man of the Church. Father Bill Miscamble of Notre Dame, thanks very much for taking time to tell us about this. It sounds like a fascinating volume.
A pleasure to be with you, Bill, and prayers for you and for all your listeners. God bless.
Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Kassel. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.